What is up, my fellow adventurers? With the new canoe season fast approaching, I thought I'd put together a little tip video for you guys on some of my favorite places to adventure in southern Ontario. The best places to paddle, the best places to backcountry camp. I grew out a long beard of wisdom, so that you guys might trust me a little bit more.
Oh, yeah. You're not gonna jump, John Paul? You can do it. I believe in you.
I tried to make this list with a little bit of variety, anything from week-long paddling trips to just a simple overnighter, maybe 2 nights, and I even threw some river trips in there for those of you who are a little bit more extreme. I've done videos on most of these trips already, so I'll throw links in the description for more in-depth of each of the trips or areas that I'm trying to talk about. The first place I want to touch on is Chiniguchi Waterways Provincial Park, which is a place that's very near and dear to my heart. I make a pilgrimage up there pretty much every year. Usually try and make it up there twice a year because it's just got everything. You can do like 5-day loops if you want to. You can do point-to-points if you want to. You could just do a simple in and out. There's tons of points of interest in this place. Just pick up a map and you'll see almost every lake has something to look at, from sunken logging alligators to nice white sand beaches, crazy lookouts.
Top of the first lookout. It's getting good.
I mean, it's got it all. And best of all, it's free. But it is first come, first serve, so be prepared for that. I know some people like to book their trips and know exactly where they're going. That's not the case here. There's pretty much infinite options for loops or point-to-points you can do through this area. You might end up in other parks, such as Temagami and that. You can even paddle up and run a bit of the Sturgeon River.
Water level needs to be quite a bit higher for this one again, but it's been the story of the day.
It might hold a special place in my heart because it's probably the area where I did my first really big trip, which was 5 days with a few friends of mine, and it really sticks in my brain and just kind of lives forever. So it's pretty special to me, so take care of it. Second place I want to mention is also free, surprise, surprise, and that's the Queen Elizabeth II Wildlands Park. It's an unorganized park, so until it gets organized, figures its stuff out, it's free for the time being. And it's a beautiful park. I always refer to it as kind of like a mini Algonquin. There's hiking trails, there's lots of paddling routes. There's no really good loops in this park per se, mostly end-to-end, and there is 1, maybe 2 point-to-point paddling trips you can do. And you could probably spend a week in there. That wouldn't be moving a lot. I'd say like a 4-day trip is pretty ideal for this area. But there's lots of cool stuff to see. Not as much history or anything in the park, but all the lakes are beautiful, and it really gives you that wild backcountry feel if that's what you're looking for. I mean, the trails aren't super well maintained.
Well, that sucked. Good detour because the beaver dam was gone. Some guys on the way over gave us a heads up on that.
Just in the last 2 years or so, they've started to sign everything, as in the campsites and the portages and that. But when I first started going there a decade ago, there was like nothing. It was basically a free-for-all. But it is getting a bit more busy, populated, however you want to say it nowadays. And yeah, most people know what it is now when you talk to avid backcountry campers.
Well, we made it. Parking lot's pretty full.
And one of the main things that I really love about this park is the fishing. Pretty much every lake in there I've had tons of success fishing and always had a great time with that. So if I'm just looking for an easy weekend fishing trip, Queen Elizabeth Wildlands is usually my go-to. Now, the first river trip for the extreme adventurers that I'm going to put on this list is the Petawawa River. This is just a premier destination for whitewater canoe trips. It's not necessarily for the faint of heart, but it's not super extreme. It's where I got my first real taste of whitewater, so it's one I recommend a lot of people do as their first whitewater trip.
Alright. Isaac and Rocky, first-hand experience. Go!
paddle?
No, we're swimming, buddy, in a second.
No! No!
If you don't want to run the whitewater though, you're going to have some fun portages. But usually the more extreme rapids are a fairly short portage. Nothing out of the ordinary for a seasoned veteran of the backcountry. One of the great things about this river is there's multiple ways you can run it. You can run it from Traverse down to McManus. I think that's the shortest way to run it. And that's pretty easy going. You get some long rapids at the end, but they're mostly like class 1s, maybe a mild class 2. And they're mostly just a good time. You hardly need to paddle. But that trip can be done in 3-4 days pretty easily. If you're looking for a little bit more extreme way to run the Pet, I'd recommend Cedar down to McManus. That's a great route. It's a little bit more scenic, I would say. You can also run from Wendigo down, I believe it is. I've done that trip years ago. I've never done that on the channel. If I had to pick one, I would just go from Cedar down. Definitely more interesting, better rapids, and the most interesting part of the Wendigo Lake trip down, you get to see anyways through the Cedar way down. The next place I want to talk about is the Halliburton Water Trails. It's a pretty good place to go if you're just starting out. You can do anything from a simple overnighter to a week-long trip if you want. The only thing I will say about it, it is a bit cottagey, so be prepared for that. Not all the lakes have cottages on them, but a fair few of them do, at least in sections. But anytime I've camped in there, it's not a problem. You feel like you're in the backcountry.
There's a few black flies here. Just a couple.
Other than maybe the occasional boat zipping by or something, which kind of spoils the experience. But if you can live with that, it's definitely a place worth checking out. There's tons of loop options and everything in here, so you never have to see the same thing twice, but you end up back at your car. It's really great for that, I will say. Lots of interconnecting routes, or there's point-to-points you can run, or simple in and outs. It has it all. And the booking system is pretty awesome. I mean, I did one trip where I was out there paddling around, and I was just booking my sites that night as I was sitting there. I'd find a nice site, oh, I'm here for the night, and sign on and book it, because the cell reception is just that good through there. So if having no cell reception makes you uncomfortable, it's also a great place for that. The park actually consists of 2 separate sections, the Frost section and the Poker Lakes. Now the Poker Lakes is a pretty small section. You could paddle this all in a day if you really wanted to and you're ambitious. Although I think it's separated by Highway 118, so there'd be a bit of a portage over a highway, which is interesting. Ugh. The Frost Center is the one with all the options, and you could spend a week in there. It's a little bit more ambitious, but probably more cottagey. So decide for yourself what you're into. If you are making your way into the Frost section, I would recommend checking out Black Cat Lake. Now, there's only 2 sites on the lake, so you probably want to book this a little in advance if it's a busy time of year, you know, around Canada Day weekend or whatever. But it's a meromictic lake, which means the 2 water levels never combine. Have your upper layer and your lower layer of water, and they intermix, I believe, twice a year. But the fact that they don't intermix, I think, keeps the water clear and that, and it is honestly one of the clearest lakes I've ever paddled. So yeah, if you're thinking about booking the Halliburton Water Trails, just keep in mind that it is a bit cottagey, but worth the experience, especially for somebody just starting out. The next river trip I'm going to talk about is the Spanish. Now, me and my buddy did this a couple of years ago, I think as a 4-day trip, I believe, and we did it on Thanksgiving weekend, which meant there weren't a lot of other paddlers on the river, so we had the whole place to ourselves. And it really made for an awesome experience. The only thing that took us out of the whole backcountry experience well on this trip was the fact that there's always a train really close to you. The tracks follow the Spanish down the route pretty closely through a lot of it. So every once in a while you'll be seeing the train go by, which is interesting. But the good part of this is that it made for a unique experience. We actually got a shuttle service which got us to the train station, and we threw our boats on the train, rode the train up the tracks for almost an hour or something, I believe, and then they just dropped us off on the side of the river in the middle of nowhere. There are a few different options for ways to run the Spanish, but I believe they all meet up at a little Y and you carry on down from there. I believe we chose to do one of the shorter routes because we were a bit limited on time, but you can add 3 or 4 days, I think, to what we ran just by picking one of the longer routes where you take one of the other channels coming into the Spanish. There is a lot of history on the Spanish River. It was interesting because our map showed various black and white photos from back in the day when it was being logged and everything. And we noticed as we were sitting on one of our campsites that one of the photos was actually of our campsite. Now there were a lot less trees on that campsite back in the day, but you could still tell by the shape of the rocks and everything that that's where we were camping, and it used to be an old logging settlement. So it made it an interesting trip. Now, there's not a lot of extreme whitewater on this trip, but it did have its fair share, such as Class 3, which was an interesting rapids, just because of the length of it. Not that it was super extreme, but it was extreme enough, and it was probably 2 kilometers long or something. So it made it a little bit nerve-wracking to drop into the top of that one. Now this trip can get expensive if you're doing the shuttle service and the train ride, which you'll probably have to do. So if you don't have deep pockets, you might want to just write this one off your list. But if money is no object, then be sure to check out the Spanish River. Now the last place on my list is the one, the only, Killarney. I know, you've probably heard of it, you've probably heard of other people paddling it and talking about how beautiful it is, and that's because it is beautiful. It is freaking beautiful, just gorgeous. I've only done one trip in there, and it wasn't a super extensive trip. We did it in the fall last year on the Thanksgiving weekend, but the colors were in full swing, and it did not disappoint. We ended up climbing the Crack, which is probably one of the most famous hiking spots in Ontario, at least southern Ontario, and the view did not disappoint. You almost felt like you were out west in the little mountain ranges or something like that. It gave you that sort of feel. So it's about as good as it gets for Ontario for that kind of view. The Lacloche mountain range is awesome. I would like to hike the Lacloche Trail someday, but it's an ambitious one. Good thing about Killarney is there's lots of options for put-ins. I believe there's at least 4 or 5 that I know of that my map shows. And the loops are not amazing, but there are a decent amount of loops that you can do. Another thing I'll say about Killarney is the campsites didn't disappoint. Pretty much every campsite was just awesome.
So we made it to site for the night, and I immediately fell in love with this pine tree behind me. I can't stop picturing all the butts that have probably sat on it over the years.
I don't know if I've seen one crappy campsite in our entire tour of Killarney. Every one I would rate as like a 7 out of 10 or higher. And everyone that we stayed on, I'd probably rate as an 8 or a 9. They're up there. Another thing I'll say about Killarney, and this probably goes without saying if you've been in the paddling world for a while or the hiking world for a while, is that it's a popular spot. So you're going to need to book in advance if you want to do the popular routes.
We didn't get to book the ideal route because we're stupid.
Now that being said, I wouldn't hesitate to paddle something that's a little off other people's radars, maybe not the ideal route, because we didn't paddle an ideal route, but the views were still spectacular, the nature was spectacular, and it was still worthwhile. Will it be better to paddle the most popular route, the one that everybody else does? Yes, but you're going to have the same stories as everyone else, so keep that in mind. Now that about does it for my list of top paddling destinations for Southern Ontario. If I didn't mention your favorite destination, be sure to leave it in the comments below. Now get out there for some adventures of your own. They're waiting for you.